the echoes of a dying star. The stars were dying. Not in the poetic sense beloved by mortal poets. No metaphor drawn from the softness of twilight or the last flicker of a candle's flame. These stars were literally dying. Their nuclear hearts collapsed into silence, spilling their death throes across the void in waves of broken light and forgotten memory. They shimmered with no purpose now, mere embers drifting in the void. And in the center of it all, where once the core of human power had blazed like a sun of its own, only ash remained. Terror, throne world of the Imperium of man, spun in hushed solemnity, a jewel half buried in its own dust. Its skies were veiled with the artificial auroras of ancient orbital defenses, forgotten satellites drifting like the bones of angels slain in heaven's war. The Emperor's light had once suffused this world. Now the light was dim. The Astronomicons sputtered. Above the ravaged cradle of humanity, a fleet hung in orbit, silent as the grave. Not loyalist, not traitor, beyond those childish dichotomies now. Its ships were clad in the black and bronze livery of mourning, their hulls adorned with relics of a war no living being wished to remember. In the heart of that fleet, aboard a command vessel once named Lament of Terror, stood a figure who had not slept in over 2 centuries. Horus, or rather, the remnant of Horus, whatever was left of him after the fires of rebellion, the poisoned whispers of the warp, and the long, slow grind of guilt that had eroded even his post-human mind. He no longer wore the armor of a war master. It sat in a silent reliquary deep within the vessel, a totem of a decision made long ago, one that had broken the galaxy in 2. He stood now in a simple robe of obsidian threads, staring through the thick viewport glass at the slowly fading light of the Sol system. The last light of the dying star caught the edges of his face, casting the ruin of his once noble features in silhouette. There was little left of the demigod who had once commanded legions. Just a tired man, a betrayed son, a traitor haunted not by madness, but by memory. He did not blink. He barely breathed. Behind him, the faint scrape of armored feet echoed softly across the chamber. Horus did not turn. "You came," he said. The voice that answered him was colder than the void. "You summoned me, Father Killer." A pause. "Do you still call him that?" Horus asked, voice devoid of scorn. The reply was slower now, uncertain. "I call him many things." The figure stepped into the light. It was not a man, not anymore. The skin was greyed by centuries of exposure to warp storms and age without age. Gold-flecked crimson armor clung to his frame like a memory of war. The eye of Horus had been scorched from the breastplate, replaced by a single vertical scar. The face bore no insignia, no helm, no name. But his eyes betrayed him. Eyes like twin suns, fierce and dying. It was Loken, one of the last of the lunar wolves who had refused to kneel to gods or ghosts. He had once followed Horus across stars, sung the praises of his brilliance in battle. Then he had watched him fall, watched him kill the Emperor, watched him survive when none should have. And in the echo of that cataclysm, he had become something else. Not a loyalist, not a traitor, just a memory given form. "I did not summon you for vengeance," Horus said. Loken's fist clenched. "Then for what?" "For judgment." That gave the other man pause. "You are dying," Loken said, voice low. "The wounds never healed." "No, I am already dead. I have been since Istvan another silence passed between them, years layered into seconds." "Then what is this?" Loken asked, voice raw. "Some ritual? A last confession before the void takes you? Or do you still believe you were right?" The words were knives, but Horus did not flinch. He stepped forward, hand resting gently on the cold glass. "I believed," he said quietly, "that I could save us." He turned, finally, and his eyes, those once glorious storeroom eyes, met Loken's. "I believed that we could build something that would not rot from within, that we could rise, not on the back of a god emperor, but as free men, as brothers. And so you shattered it all," Loken spat. "You destroyed everything to free us." Horus nodded. "Yes, and I would do it again for a moment." Only the hum of the ship's engines filled the silence. Then Loken stepped forward. "Then you're mad." "Am I?" Horus whispered. "Or was I simply the only one willing to face what he had become?" A ghost of the past flickered between them. The Emperor, not the radiant god of the Ecclesiarchy's lies, but the man they had followed, the one who spoke in visions of unity, even as he forged prisons from science and shackled the warp in chains of hypocrisy. "You saw it too," Horus said softly. "Even you. I saw a father who loved us enough to bleed for us, and lie to us, hide from us, make monsters of us." Loken was trembling now, not from fear, but from the weight of it all, the grief that had never healed, the betrayal that had never lost its sting. "You made your choice," he said finally. "So did you." Silence again. Then Horus reached for something, an ancient data codex inscribed with sigils in both High Gothic and forgotten tongues. He handed it to Loken. "What is this?" the warrior asked, wary. "Everything I saw, everything I learned, the truth of chaos, the lie of the Golden Throne, and the fate we almost chose." Loken stared at it as if it might burn him. "And what would you have me do with this?" "Take it to those who still remember." "Who can remember?" "Before the last star dies, before the last gene seed crumbles to ash. Give them a choice. Let them decide what future to make." Loken hesitated. "Or destroy it," Horus said, shrugging. "And let us be forgotten." Like the rest, he turned back to the viewport. Outside, the last glimmer of Sol blinked, then flickered, then dimmed. "I'm tired, Loken. You deserve no rest." "No," Horus agreed, "but I hope for it anyway." And with that, he stepped into the darkness of the ship, robes trailing behind him like shadows stitched to the fabric of regret. Loken remained, alone with the codex and the dying stars. Far below, terror turned on its broken axis. Somewhere beneath its crust, deep in the catacombs of forgotten memory, the throne still pulsed, a corpse god dreaming. The war was long over, but the wounds had never healed, and somewhere, out in the void between light and silence, a choice waited, a final whisper from a fallen war master. Ashes and echoes. The codex was heavier than it should have been. Loken held it as though it might shatter him, this black slab of memory etched in the ink of forgotten screams. Each rune along its obsidian spine pulsed faintly, like trapped breaths exhaled centuries ago. Some part of him expected it to whisper, to lie, to tempt, but it did nothing. It simply was, like truth. The War Master's voice still rang in Loken's ears, calm, quiet, final, as if he had already stepped into death and only his memory lingered. The man he once followed had not begged, had not justified. He had explained, and that, more than anything, shook Loken to his core. He stood alone in the observation deck long after Horus had vanished into the ship's depths. Outside, terror loomed like a tomb wrapped in lightless cloud. How many centuries had passed since he had last walked that surface? How many lives? How many lies? "You said you'd never return here," came a voice from behind. Loken stiffened. He did not turn immediately. He did not need to. He recognized that voice as he had once recognized the thunder of war. Garville. The name spoken was like the crack of a bone long since healed. Still alive then. The figure emerged from the gloom, a tall warrior clad in white. The armor bore no heraldry, save for a single pauldron scorched black. His hair was silver now, but the face was ageless, save for the eyes, which carried the weight of every atrocity Loken had witnessed and endured. Tylos Rubio, once a word-bearer, once a brother, now something else entirely. I'm not here for old ghosts, Loken said. Rubio's smile was faint, bitter, and yet, here you stand. In orbit above the bones of everything we ever fought for, Loken turned now, slowly, the codex still in hand. I came to see if he was still capable of regret. Rubio stepped forward, a trace of caution in his movement. And? Did you find it? He's tired. That's not the same as remorse. No, but it's close enough. They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of the dying ship around them. The lament of terror was old, far older than it should have been allowed to be. Its hull was a patchwork of salvaged parts from forgotten fleets, its soul barely contained in machine runes and prayer. It lived, but only barely, like them. You still believe in the Emperor? Loken asked suddenly. Rubio tilted his head. I believe he was real. That he bled, that he burned, that's not an answer. No, Rubio agreed. It isn't. The codex throbbed faintly in Loken's hand, not with power, but with significance. You followed Erebus, Loken said. You led men into damnation. You were at Kalth, and you were at Istvan. We all have sins. I fought for us. You fought for a dream that was already dying. Just like the Emperor, Loken looked away. He wanted to rage, to scream, to kill. But what would it matter? All their wars, all their righteousness had left only echoes. All their battles had been for a corpse that no longer ruled, only endured. Rubio continued, voice lower now. Do you remember the ninth oath? Loken's breath caught. The ninth oath, sworn in the dark before the heresy, sworn by those lunar wolves who believed in more than orders, sworn by brothers who still remembered what unity meant. I remember. Then remember this too, Rubio said. Not all of us betrayed you. Some of us were broken, others bent, and some of you became monsters. Rubio did not flinch. We all did, Loken. Every single one of us. You just wear your guilt cleaner. The silence returned. Loken looked down at the codex again. He had not opened it. Some part of him feared what was inside, not warp lies or heresies, but truth too jagged to live with. What if he was right, he whispered. What if we built this Imperium on lies and couldn't live with them? Rubio didn't answer. He simply looked at the codex. You going to open it? Loken stared. He remembered the voices, the oaths, the betrayal, the fire, the Emperor's broken form upon the golden throne. He remembered Ezekiel Abaddon, weeping as terror fell. He remembered the last transmission from Malkador, before he turned to dust, and he remembered the silence that followed. What good would the truth do now? Who was left to hear it? And yet, the codex opened with a soft hiss. Ancient mechanisms responding to forgotten biometrics. Lines of red data scroll spread across the inside, arcing in ancient High Gothic. Words burned themselves into his mind, forming truths he had never dared consider. Horus had seen something, not just chaos, not just corruption, but purpose. A prophecy buried in the warp, hidden from the Emperor himself. A path that split the galaxy into ruin or rebellion, and he had chosen. No gods, Loken muttered. Only choices, Rubio finished. Then a flicker, a shimmer of motion in the corner of the room. Both men turned. A figure stood there, cloaked in fractal light, robes of indigo and void-dyed silk, a golden mask without expression. No sound marked her arrival. Who? Loken began, but he knew in some deep place he knew. Sigillite, Rubio said softly, or what remains of her. The figure bowed slightly. I am what he left behind, she said. Her voice was layered, female, ancient, a whisper of logic and sorrow. You knew he would give me this, Loken said, raising the codex. I hoped he would, the Sigillite replied. The Emperor's dream has become a prison. The War Master's rebellion a graveyard. But memory might still build something new. Hope, Rubio scoffed. A dangerous thing, she agreed. But all we have. Loken stepped forward. The codex closed in his hands, locking shut with a faint chime. What do you want me to do with it? The Sigillite's eyes behind the mask seemed to glow faintly. Bring it to the ashes of Saul, to the gate that should never have been opened. There you will find what remains, and if I refuse, then we will all die in silence, forgotten. Alone. Loken looked at Rubio. We swore an oath, the former word-bearer said quietly. One last time? The Lunar Wolf nodded. The Sigillite stepped back into the shadows, and Loken, codex in hand, burden in heart, turned toward the dying light of the sun. The war had ended, but the truth had not. The hollow throne. The journey to Saul's broken core was silent. No orders, no marching chants, no vox prayers. Only the steady hum of the lament of terror and the groaning pulse of its half-living engines. Beneath Loken's boots, the ship bled oil like a wounded animal. He could feel it. This vessel was dying, not from age, but from the memory of what it once carried. Rubio sat across from him in the war room, not speaking, just watching the flickering holomap of the solar system with its many scars. Mars was gone, consumed in the final Mechanicum schism. Venus lay fractured, a chain of orbital debris still humming with forbidden scrap code. Terra itself was veiled in storm, wrapped in a warp static so thick not even astropaths could pierce it. And at the center of it all, the throne world, once the axis of human power, now a reliquary of sin. Loken stared at the slowly turning icon of the palace ruins. Do you think there's anything left? He asked at last. Rubio's eyes remained on the projection. Of the Emperor. Of us. The former word-bearer said nothing for a long time. Then, I don't know. But if there is, it won't forgive us. Silence fell again. The Sigillite had not spoken since boarding. She moved like thought, present, but never quite seen. She had no scent, no footsteps, no breath. The crew bowed when she passed, instinctively, as if she were a gravity well unto herself. They did not know her name, only the absence she carried. Loken found her waiting for him by the observation window as Saul drew closer, its light no longer golden, but cracked. The sun was dying, though slowly. Its corona had faded, and dark filaments danced like ash across its surface, a star grown weary. Why here? Loken asked her. Why return? She didn't look at him. Because you need to remember. I remember everything. Istvan, Horus, the palace gates, the screams no. You remember pain, not truth. She turned, and her mask gleamed with ghostlight. You still believe the Emperor was a man? That Horus was a traitor, that Malkador died. Loken's jaw tensed. He did die. On the throne. I saw the pyres. The Sigillite moved past him, slow, graceful, untouched by time. You saw what you were allowed to see. The lies told to keep you loyal Loken followed. Then what's the truth? that the war never ended, that the heresy was only the first wound, that something older still lingers beneath the rock of terror where Malkador once walked. She stopped before the great vault doors of the ship's inner sanctum. Gold inlay traced ancient hexagrammic wards, almost worn away. One final seal glowed faintly. He knew, she said. Malkador knew what the Emperor had become, what Horus had become. He knew this galaxy would never be ruled by men again. The doors opened. Inside was darkness, not absence, but weight, the kind of dark that waits. Loken stepped through without speaking. What lay beyond was no room. It was a crypt. The chamber was circular, its walls lined with stasis fields, each containing relics sealed since the siege. A broken custodes helmet, a petrified servitor skull etched with high Gothic codes, a blood-stained aquila, a single thunderhammer with the symbol of the lunar wolves burned out, and at the center, a sarcophagus, black, seamless, floating just above the ground. Loken approached slowly. This isn't a tomb. No, the sigillite agreed. It's a prison. The sarcophagus hummed faintly, reacting to his presence. His gene seed, perhaps, or his regret. I don't want to open it. But you will, she said gently, because you're looking for something. Even if you don't know what his hand hovered over the rune lock, one press, one moment, and the past would bleed out. Why me? He whispered. Because you loved him. He pressed. The sarcophagus sang open, not with metal, but with memory. A sound like a child's cry, warped by centuries. The lid retracted into non-space. Cold mist poured out, fogging the air. Inside lay a man, or what had once been one. He wore robes of grey and gold, tattered and scorched. His skin was ash, his hands skeletal, but the face, drawn, quiet, undying, was unmistakable. Malkador the sigillite, unmoving, but not dead. Rubio knelt. Loken did not. Is he awake? Loken asked. No, the masked woman said. He remembers. That is worse. For a long time, Loken stood in silence. Finally he spoke. This is a trap. No, the sigillite said. This is revelation. Loken turned toward her, fury barely held. Why show me this now? Because soon, she said, the Imperium will fall again, and the choice will be yours, not to save it, but to let it die well. I'm not a leader, he spat. I'm a relic. You're a witness, she corrected, and witnesses are the last hope of truth. A quiet beeping interrupted them. The ship's cogitators chirped warnings in binaric. Approaching lunar orbit, said the Vox drone. Loken turned his gaze back to the sarcophagus. Malkador had not changed, but he had. In the hollows of that chamber, something settled in him. Not peace, but clarity. He did not forgive Horus. He did not believe in the Emperor. He did not trust the sigillite. But he knew this. The war had broken everyone, even the immortal. And the only redemption left was remembrance. As they prepared to descend to the throne world, Rubio leaned close. We're not coming back from this. Loken nodded. I know. And the lament of terror began its descent. Ashes of the throne. There were no stars above terror. The warp storms had not receded in 10,000 years. Only shadows churned across the heavens now, black tendrils that bled through the stratosphere like the breath of gods long drowned. Even from orbit, Loken had seen the cratered corpse of the once golden world. Oceans had boiled away. Hive cities now lay as charred husks, forests of rusted bones stabbing skyward. He did not recognize it. Rubio stood beside him on the shuttle deck, staring through the pitted glass. This was holy ground, he said quietly. Loken shook his head. It was never holy. Just costly. The lament of terror had not dared land within the bounds of the Imperial Palace. Nothing could. The orbital defense grid, half awake, still tracked everything with the paranoia of a wounded machine spirit. The only safe entry was through Luna's blind arc, past the sunken spire of Unity, what remained of it, and down through the choked chasm where the western gate had once stood. They descended in silence. The sky darkened. The air grew thick. And then, ruin. The shuttle's ramps descended into a world of ash and silence. The palace was not gone, but it had collapsed into itself, like a beast trying to die in private. Towers lay bent over. Plazas once large enough to house entire populations were drowned in dust and cracked statuary. A sea of broken marble lay beneath their feet. Rubio stepped forward, exhaling through his respirator. "You hear that?" Loken listened. At first nothing. Then, whispers. It wasn't the wind. There was no wind here. It was memory. Recordings etched into the very air by psychic trauma. Ghost echoes. Remnants of the siege. Vox screams, orders, curses, and one long, drawn-out word. Horus. The voice tore through Loken's mind like a spear. He staggered. Rubio steadied him. The sigillite walked ahead, untouched. Her bare feet left no mark. She guided them deeper into the palace grounds, her presence dulling the spectral shrieks that hung, like frost. They passed through the hall of tribunals. Once, banners of every loyalist legion had hung here bright and proud. Now they lay in tatters, buried beneath rubble. The ultramarine crest, the Raven Guard's black wings, even the lunar wolves. A banner left behind in shame, its symbol torn from the cloth. Loken knelt. He picked up the broken standard and held it, not with pride, not with grief, just silence. He didn't know how long they walked. Time felt thinner here, like breath on glass. The palace was a wound in the galaxy, unhealed, festering, and at its heart, the throne. They stopped at the edge of a vast chasm. The throne room no longer stood. It sank, down and down, past levels of cyclopean architecture and submerged vaults of now quiet black ships. The golden throne itself had not been moved. It had sunk with the tectonic shift caused by the final psychic cataclysm that sealed the Emperor's fate. And yet, its aura lingered. The sigillite turned to Loken. "This is where he died." Loken's voice was raw. "You mean Horus?" "No, I mean the Emperor." He stared at her. "I watched him live for 10,000 years. She nodded. "Yes, a shell of what he was. A god without will, a flame held in a dying lamp. Then what did we fight for?" She said nothing, because there was no answer. Rubio stared into the pit, eyes narrow. "What's down there now?" "Memory," she replied. "Truth, lies. It doesn't matter. It's all the same." He left a message. "For whom?" "You." Loken turned from her. "I don't want it. You don't have a choice." She reached into her cloak and retrieved something small, simple. An iron key, shaped like a sigil of no known order. She offered it to him. He stared at it. "This was Malcador's," he whispered. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. He took it. They began the descent. There were no stairs, only narrow, broken ledges where stone had crumbled. The air thickened with every step downward. Dust clung to their armor, their skin. Shadows gathered where light should have followed. After 1,000 steps, they passed a scorched engraving, unification through sacrifice, and below it, a mural. Loken stopped. It was still intact. The Emperor, radiant and impossible, stood with one hand raised. Around him knelt the Primarchs, each frozen in devotion. Horus at his right hand, Guilliman at his left, Vulcan aflame, Magnus already beginning to crack. Loken stared at it, trembling. I believed in him, he murmured. Rubio stood beside him. So did I. The Sigillite stepped forward. He was never meant to be believed in. He was a weapon. And what are we? Loken asked bitterly. Wreckage? No, she said. You are the witnesses. And the witnesses are the last to fall. They entered the final chamber. And there, amid the flickering ruins of gold circuitry and shattered psychoconduits, stood the throne. Not golden now, just a corpse of a machine. Vines of null cables dangled from above. The skulls of the Adeptus Custodes lay where they fell, still guarding a ghost. The air crackled faintly with dead psionics, and the throne sat empty. No corpse, no emperor. Only a black mark scorched into the stone where his presence had once radiated. Loken stepped forward slowly. The iron key in his hand pulsed. He knelt before the throne. He did not pray. He did not beg. He whispered, "Why?" The throne answered, not with sound, but with vision. He saw the Emperor standing over Horus's shattered body, Malcador screaming in silence as he took the throne, custodians dragging Loken's broken body from the field, Malcador again, only not dying, not screaming, but waiting, stasis, silence. The Sigillite's mask slowly forming in darkness, and behind it all, an eye, watching, always watching. He fell backward, gasping. Rubio caught him. The Sigillite knelt. You asked what you fought for. He looked at her. You didn't fight for the Imperium, she said. You fought to delay the inevitable. What inevitable? The collapse of order. The return of the true gods. The cycle reborn. And now, she stood. Now it begins again. Loken rose to his feet. He stared at the empty throne, and something in him broke. Not loudly, quietly, the last illusion dying. He dropped the key on the floor. We're not meant to rule, he said. No, she agreed. We're meant to end. Behind them, the ghost of the throne flickered, its final ember dying. The Librarius of Dust. They called it the Librarius Nihilus, the library of the dead word. It was never marked on any star chart. No navigator had mapped its location, for its presence drifted in the warp like an unmoored dream. And yet it endured, orbiting the dead star of Othros Prime, where the light no longer reached. It was here the Sigillite led them, beyond terror, beyond the Emperor's corpse, into the mind of the Imperium itself. Rubio's hands trembled as they passed through the null seals. His breath fogged inside his helm, even though the air was perfectly filtered. This place shouldn't exist, he whispered. Loken said nothing. He'd known something like this must remain, some vault of forbidden knowledge, hidden from the ecclesiarchy, the Inquisition, even the Adeptus Custodes. But he'd never imagined it would feel so quiet. The Librarius was built into a moon-sized black obelisk, shaped like a blade piercing the void. Inside were halls, catacombs almost, lined with data slates, cryo-caskets, and etched tablets older than human memory. Each record told a story, and none of them were true, or perhaps all of them were. They passed a mural carved into the wall, rough, ancient. It showed a Primarch kneeling not before the Emperor, but before something else, something vast, winged, eyes like stars, a god of old night. Rubio stopped. That's not recognizable, the Sigillite said. He nodded. No, because it was erased. Rubio swallowed. Why show us this now? She turned slowly, her eyes tired. Because you no longer serve illusion, and neither does he. Loken stood before a sealed vault. It pulsed with dull light. 10 sigils glowed along the edges, each one the symbol of a legion lost or cursed. He touched the mark of the lunar wolves. It burned, not with pain, but memory. Inside, the vault hissed open. Within lay a sarcophagus of silver, covered in frost. Rubio stepped closer. "Who is that?" Loken stared at it, the ache in his bones returning. "My brother," he said quietly. "Garviel." Rubio blinked. "But you're Garviel." Loken didn't answer. The Sigillite stepped between them. "He was split," she said, "torn by the warp and remade by Malkador's hand. One survived as Loken, the other buried here, frozen in the moments before the siege." Rubio reeled. "That's impossible." The Sigillite met his gaze. "We do not build empires on truth, Rubio. We build them on what must endure." He turned to her, trembling with rage. "All this time, we were puppets." "No," she replied. "You were witnesses. But now you must choose. Remain as you are, or open the past." Loken stared at his own corpse. "I remember dying," he whispered. "And yet you didn't," she said, "because Malkador intervened. He rewrote your thread in the warp, resurrected you, not wholly, not cleanly, just enough to remember, and now you must finish what he couldn't." Rubio turned away, his voice low. "This isn't right. None of it. The Emperor, the heresy, the truth." The Sigillite's voice cut through the air, weary but firm. "There is no truth, Rubio. Only the echo that lasts the longest silence followed." The chamber's lights dimmed. Something stirred deep within the librarius, an ancient machine spirit long dormant. Loken felt it pulse behind the walls like a buried heartbeat. The Sigillite walked ahead, her cloak trailing behind like shadow. "Come," she said. "There is one more memory you must face." They descended deeper. Below the librarius lay a chamber untouched by light. Here the records were not written in text, but in souls. Caged psychers lined the walls, dreaming the memories of 10,000 years, their minds turned into living tomes. Echoes of Guilliman's final command, Sanguinius's last breath, the whisper of Horus as he fell, not as a traitor, but as a son. Each dream was a prison, each memory a trap. Rubio stared into one of the dreaming psychers. He saw fire, Ultramar burning, Guilliman on his knees, coughing blood as the claws of Fulgrim struck home. Words unspoken, forgiveness undelivered. He stumbled back. Loken caught him. "You see it now," Loken said. "The weight of remembrance." "It's poison." The Sigillite raised her hand, and a hidden door hissed open. At its center stood a mirror, not glass, not metal, just light. In it, Loken saw himself, not as he was, but as he might have been. Captain Garviel Loken, loyal lunar wolf, hero of Istvan, whole, pure, untouched by betrayal. He walked to it slowly. Rubio spoke behind him, voice hoarse. "Don't." "I have to," Loken said. He placed his palm against the light. The mirror shivered, and Loken saw the Emperor weeping. Not on the throne, on the battlefield, holding Horus in his arms, begging him to stop. And Horus, eyes full of pain, saying, "You made me this." Then, the flash of power, the soul-destroying blow, and silence. The mirror went dark. Loken turned away, breath ragged. "He didn't want to kill him," he whispered. "No," the Sigillite said, "but he did. Because empires are not built on love. And You are the last page," she said, "the final word of the first heresy." And the beginning of the next. Rubio stepped forward, face pale. "Then what now? What do we do with all this?" The Sigillite looked at him. "You burn it." Rubio's eyes widened. Loken did not flinch. He nodded, because he knew now what must be done. Truth could not be preserved, only released. The ash of memory. The decision was made in silence. They stood before the Librarius Nihilus's core, a spindle of impossible architecture spiraling inward into a burning gravity well. Its databanks hummed with the breath of 10,000 years. Every lie, every truth, every grey decision encoded in stasis. Malkador had designed it not as a library, but a lock, and only Loken could open it. Rubio stared at the control spire, its keys engraved with the Primarch's names, not as titles, but as regrets. He looked to Loken. If we do this, we erase it all. The real history, the true cost. Loken's voice was heavy with memory. Or we allow it to live long enough to destroy us again. Rubio wanted to argue, but in his soul, he knew they had already crossed a line that would never let them return. In this place, choices weren't about right or wrong, only survival or consequence. The sigillite, ever still, spoke from the edge of the chamber. Fire purifies, memory corrupts. That is the equation Malkador believed in. I don't expect you to agree. Only to understand. Rubio turned, his voice ragged. And what do you believe? She looked at him for a long moment. I believe that memory is a tyrant, and you are its heir. Loken stepped forward and placed his palm on the spire. It lit with cold flame. One by one, the locks began to dissolve. Lion L. Johnson, Conrad Kurz, Magnus, Horus. Each name was a blade to the heart. And finally, Garviel. Rubio flinched. Wait, if you destroy this, there'll be nothing left. No record of the Emperor's crimes. No evidence of Malkador's manipulation. They'll never know. That's the point, Loken whispered. They were never supposed to. Rubio took a slow step toward the sigillite, his hands curled into fists. Then this was never about truth. It was about control. The sigillite's voice lowered to a whisper. Control is how we endure. Truth is how we die. A beat of silence followed. Then alarms, faint, distorted, echoing through the librarius like the heartbeat of a dying god. Something was coming. Rubio turned sharply. What is that? The sigillite narrowed her eyes. The past is waking. The walls trembled. Dust fell from the vaulted ceiling as unseen forces clawed at the edges of reality. Rubio felt it before he heard it. A presence pushing against the edges of the warp-warded tomb. It was not demon. It was not machine. It was memory, weaponized. A voice rose from the dark. Garviel. Loken froze. Rubio stepped back. From the shadowed corridor beyond the vault, a shape emerged, lurching, flickering, wrapped in ghostlight. It was a man, or had once been, wearing Lunar Wolf's plate, half-shattered, eyes glowing with full soul light. You are not supposed to wake me, it said. Loken stared. No, it can't be. Rubio turned to the sigillite. What is that? She didn't answer. The figure limped forward, dragging one leg behind it. I remember it all, the ghost said. Istvan, the lies, the failure. Loken felt the old pain rise like fire. Tylos, Rubio whispered the name like a prayer. Tylos Rubio. The ghost nodded. I was your brother. Your shield. Until you chose him, Loken stepped forward. I didn't choose Horus. You chose silence. The words cut deeper than any blade. Rubio watched as Loken bowed his head. He saw the crack widen in the older warrior's soul. Fracture lines formed not by time, but by guilt. I carried the truth, the ghost said, voice rising. I remembered when the rest of you forgot. And now you would burn it all. It raised a hand. Warp light sparked in its palm. Rubio stepped in front of Loken. He didn't forget. The ghost sneered. Then why is he here? Loken looked up. To finish it. The sigillite stepped forward now. He speaks the truth. The ghost turned, eyes blazing. And what of you, old witch? You who made memory your weapon? Her face showed no emotion. I serve consequence. Not legacy, the ghost screamed. It was not rage. It was sorrow. endless, eternal, consuming. The cry of someone who had never stopped remembering, and then it attacked. Loken moved first, old instincts reawakening like thunder. He met the ghost strike with a clenched fist, not blade. Rubio followed, his mind locked in warp focus, pushing the spectre back with sheer will. It was not a duel. It was a collision of regrets. The chamber split. The spire flared. And in the moment between moments, Rubio saw the true Rubio, the one who had died long ago in Malcador's lab, torn apart in a failed experiment to clone a loyal Primarch. The boy who was rebuilt from ashes and lies. He saw himself, a memory wearing skin. He screamed, and the ghost faltered. Loken struck once, clean, final. The ghost fell apart in strands of white fire. Silence returned. Rubio collapsed to his knees. Loken knelt beside him. I didn't know. The sigillite stood at the edge of the chamber. Her voice was gentle now. You were both born from loss. And now, you must decide what to do with it. The spire waited. Burn the memory, or keep it. Rubio stood slowly. His voice was quiet. If we destroy it, we free the Imperium from its past. Loken nodded. And if we don't, we doom it to repeat it. He looked at the spire, then at the sigillite, then back at Rubio. Together. Rubio hesitated. Then he placed his hand beside Loken's. The spire accepted them. The vaults began to burn, slowly, gravely. Every record ignited not in flame, but in forgetting. Names vanished, faces blurred, truth dissolved into starlight. The Librarius Nihilus fell silent, and the galaxy, for a moment, forgot to breathe. When the stars forgot their names, the fires of the Librarius Nihilus had burned for 12 hours. No flame touched matter. No heat rose from the blackstone veins. But something had changed. The vault's memory husk remained, but it no longer spoke. Records were gone. Testimonies vanished. It was as if time itself had turned away. But the galaxy had not. Beyond the shielding ward fogs of terror, a signal pulsed, a ripple in the noosphere. Faint at first, buried beneath warp carrion and astropathic static. Then louder, sharper, until it reached the edge of the Sol system. And then someone listened. The Mechanicum of Riser was first to detect it, their cogitator oracles vomiting code they did not understand. Mars followed, then Voss, then the deep cryocrypts of Titan. Each heard the same thing, a voice, garbled, broken, but ancient. He remembers, he knows, the fire is not gone. It is only hidden, that was all. But for those who still feared the past, it was enough. Far above Terra's ash-thick clouds, an imperial vessel of no recorded name emerged from beyond the moon's far side. It bore no heraldry. Its crew were not mortal. And at its helm stood a figure thought extinct, encased in black adamantium plate, veiled in null shrouds. A face, no longer a face. A Primarch remade. He bore no name now, but once he had been called Alfarius. Beside him, a figure less known, sheathed in crystalline armor, her body half real, half reflection. She went by many names, but in the files of long erased inquisitorial archives, she had once been recorded as the Mirror of Delphi. They did not speak. They did not need to. They had been listening for centuries, and now the memory had stirred. On Terra, Rubio awoke screaming. The dream was not his own. He had seen himself standing in the ruins of the lunar cathedral, surrounded by weeping saints who bled oil. He had seen a broken throne covered in chains. He had seen the Emperor, but not as man or god, as hollow, eyes burned out, mouth stitched shut. And in his dream, the corpse whispered, "You did not destroy it. You only moved it." He clutched his chest. His breath caught. The warp residue clung to his skin like tar. Loken stood nearby, silent in vigil. "She's right," Rubio said between gulps of air. "The sigillite. It's not gone. We just buried it deeper." Loken didn't reply immediately. His face was worn, older, not in years, but in cost. "She always knew this would happen," he said at last. "She just wanted us to own it." Rubio looked at him. "Then why does it still feel like we failed?" A voice answered from the door. "Because you did." They turned. The sigillite entered, her cloak tattered with warped flame, her face pale from the effort of sustaining the psychic veils that had concealed them. "The Alpha Legion knows," she said. "Or at least remembers enough to guess." Rubio stood. "Then it's war." "No," she said. "Not yet. Not war. First, they'll come for the truth. Then they'll come for you." Loken clenched a gauntleted fist. "Let them." The sigillite's eyes narrowed. "They won't come through the sky." Rubio tilted his head. "What does that mean?" "They'll come through you." The words chilled the room. Rubio shook his head. "That's not possible." But he stopped. He remembered the dream, the whisper, the corpse on the throne. "You only moved it." He looked down at his hand. It was shaking. Aboard the Alpha Legion vessel, Alpharius stood in silence before a stasis field. Within it floated a fragment of memory flesh, harvested at Istvan III, sealed in psychic ice for 10,000 years. Tylos Rubio, a piece of him anyway. It twitched, spoke. "Find him. Find me." "Before they lock us away again," Alpharius turned to the mirror. She nodded once, and the hunt began. Rubio sat at the edge of the sigillite sanctum. The lights were low, the air was still. He felt it now, inside him. Not corruption, not warp, but memory, alive, recursive, intelligent. A second presence. He whispered to it. "Are you real?" No reply. "Then, I remember what you forgot," he gasped. It wasn't a voice. It was himself, not now, not the Rubio who stood trembling on terror, but the first one. The one Malcador had burned, the one who had died screaming in the experiments to clone a mind that could replace Horus. "You are me, and I am the cost." He fell to his knees. Loken caught him. "Tell me what you see." Rubio's eyes were distant. "He's waking up." "Who?" "The past." In orbit, the skies fractured. The veil around Terra, woven by the last psychic engineers of the Dark Age, began to fail. One by one, sensor ghosts flickered into being. 1,000 ships, 1,000,000. None of them real, but all of them, remembered. Alpharius did not need to breach the walls of Terra. He only needed to rewrite what Terra believed was true. And truth, like memory, was a weapon. The sigillite gathered them in the vault of starlight. "This is the end of containment," she said. Rubio's skin was grey with fever. His pupils mirrored stars that no longer existed. Loken asked, "Then what do we do?" She looked at them both and smiled sadly. "We don't protect the Imperium anymore." She reached into her sleeve and pulled forth a data crystal. A single pulsing rune burned on its surface. The truth again. Unfiltered, unpurged, real. "We infect it." Above, Alpharius watched the cradle of mankind. He whispered the ancient motto of the Legion long thought dead. "Truth is a lie we tell the stars." And then he gave the order. "Begin transmission." The past, long buried, rose like fire in the veins of the Imperium. The memory plague. The transmission spread like a stain across the stars. At first it whispered, then it howled, then, like a scream lost in time, it remembered. Across Segmentum Solar and beyond, Vox towers died in silence, their arrays overloaded by recursive data loops They could not pass. Hollow missionaries collapsed, foaming, as sermons were overtaken by the sound of forgotten voices, Primarchs long dead speaking again, echoing from long erased history. What if the Emperor lied? What if Horus was not the betrayer, but the sacrificed? What if the war was never about loyalty, but memory? It was not a virus. It was a seed, a truth, wrapped in enough contradiction and shadow that it bypassed every purity filter the Mechanicum had crafted over millennia. Each datum was incomplete, but together they formed a riddle, a cipher only one mind could solve, and that mind was breaking. Tylos Rubio bled from his nose. He had locked himself in the deep vault of the Sigillite's chamber, surrounded by stasis-bound data caskets and their side dampeners. But it wasn't enough. He heard it, heard them. Not voices, his voice. All versions of him. Lives that had not happened. Clone echoes, memory shells. Soul fractures from biothermic resurrection tests. Each screaming a different truth. Each claiming to be the original. You are not him. We were better. You let her do this to us. Why did we die? If you would only kneel. He screamed back, but his throat made no sound. The Sigillite watched from the upper tier, her face unreadable. You said he was strong, Loken said beside her. He is, she replied. Loken looked down. You just didn't say what that strength would cost. She said nothing, because she knew. On Luna, the astropathic cloisters fell one by one, not from battle, from belief. A single message had breached the Emperor's silent edict. It spoke of Istvan, but differently. It showed Horus weeping on the vengeful spirit, his armor, broken, holding a blade with his own name inscribed across the hilt. It showed the Emperor turning away. Some said it was false, but some remembered, or wanted to. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the truth of the heresy became a question, not an answer. The seed had rooted. Now it bloomed. The High Lords of Terror convened behind locked adamantium gates, their ancient faces twisted in ritual disgust and hidden fear. One by one, they viewed the recovered fragments of the Alpha Legion transmission. One by one, they fell silent. The Fabricator General of Mars declared the signal mechanically unprovable. The Grand Provost of the Ministorum declared it spiritually heretical. But the Master of the Administratum, an ancient with glass eyes and a heart of bronze, leaned forward and whispered, "What if it's true?" No one replied, because the thought was already alive in them. Back in the vault, Rubio sat in stillness. His body twitched, but his mind had gone elsewhere, spiraling through false lives, broken futures, and the dying moments of thousands of Tylos Rubios who never survived the experiments that birthed him. He saw them all, and in the middle of it, a throne. Not the golden throne of the Emperor, but a smaller one, made of bones, bound by chains, and upon it sat a shadow, not Horus, not Malkador, himself. He asked the dream, "Is this what she made me for?" The figure on the throne opened its eyes. "No, this is what you made yourself for." He awoke, gasping, and laughed, not because he was free, but because now he understood. On the edge of Segmentum Tempestus, an inquisitorial ship called the Obedience of Fire received the Alpha transmission and followed it back. It should not have been possible. The Alpha Legion did not leave trails, but this one had been left intentionally. They followed the trail to an ancient relay buoy, floating dead above a collapsed star system. Upon it, one word burned, etched in self-sustaining warp fire. Perdition. Inside a message waited, not for them, for Rubio. Loken watched as the sigillite knelt before the last librarius archives not yet erased. "You knew this would happen," he said. She did not look up. "I didn't know when," she answered. "Only that it would come from him." Loken frowned. "Alfarius?" "No," she said softly. "Rubio." She stood. "This has all happened before." He turned toward her, stunned. "What do you mean?" Her eyes were glassy, distant. "There was another war," she said. "Not the heresy. Older, forgotten. A war of ideas, of memory, before the warp tore open, before the Emperor decided to unify humanity with truth made in his own image." She touched the archive. "I remember it now." She turned. He was there. Loken didn't know who she meant, but he feared he did. Back in his cell, Rubio had stopped, shaking. His voice was calm now, but it wasn't just his voice. It was layered, like a choir of echoes. Each version of himself, harmonized. Loken entered, unsure of what he would find. Rubio looked up and smiled. "I remember everything," Loken asked. "And what do you want to do with it?" Rubio's eyes glowed faintly. "I want to give it back." "To who?" Rubio stood. "To everyone." Loken froze. "You'll destroy the Imperium." Rubio looked past him, into the vault's shadows. "Maybe it deserves it." Behind them, the sigillite stepped forward and whispered, "Then it begins." The first memory plague outbreak occurred on the world of Calex Primus. 3 billion souls awoke from sleep murmuring the names of dead Primarchs, quoting lost doctrines of unity, and sketching ancient, forbidden glyphs into the sand. They did not know why, but they all spoke the same phrase. "I remember now. I remember who I was before the heresy." The Adeptus Astra Telepathica quarantined the world. The Inquisition burned it, but it was too late. Memory had become a weapon. Rubio, once the clone of a lie, now stood as its prophet. And Alfarius, watching from the void, whispered, "Now they will know the truth." The Council of Ashes, the Hall of Oaths, had once echoed with the footsteps of Primarchs. Now it whispered with ghosts. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, where the rockcrete veins of terror bled into forgotten catacombs, the High Lords convened again. But not in splendor. This was no chamber of triumph. It was a vault, lit by sunless candelabras, surrounded by mute statues of men whose names had been erased. Their meeting was not recorded, their words forbidden from the lexicon of history. The sigillite stood at the head of the table, not the sigillite of legend, not Malcador, but the woman who bore his name and wore his silence like armor. A reincarnation in spirit, not flesh. To most of them, she was a phantom of doctrine. To others, a necessity. To all, she was dangerous. She looked across the table, eyes resting briefly on the Fabricator General, the Grand Provost, the speaker for the Astronomicon. "You have seen the plague," she began. "The memory lies are breaking." The Fabricator's voice clanged, hollow with disdain. "Data chimeras. Psychic infection." "No more," she nodded. "A convenient theory." "Do you deny it?" asked the Master of Assassins. "That the Alpha Legion seeded this corruption?" "I do not," she replied. "But you assume that truth is the corruption." Whispers rose, uneasy. "You assume we can survive without lies," she added more quietly. On Dagonet, a shrine world steeped in blood offerings and solar processions, the ecclesiarchy began to splinter. Thousands of sermons now opened with the phrase, "In the name of the 20th." At first, the priest burned the heretics. Then they burned each other, because the dreams had come dreams of Lorgar, weeping at the foot of the golden throne. Dreams of Gilliman, not building an empire, but burying it. Dreams that felt more real than waking life. Some called it a curse, others a revelation. In the council chamber, the sigillite motioned to Loken, who stood beside her like a blade long sheathed. "Show them," she said. He stepped forward and activated the hollow scroll. What emerged was not an image, but a memory, a fragment of Rubio's recovered mind. It played out as if real. The Emperor, standing before the assembled Primarchs, speaking of unity. But his voice was different, warmer, uncertain, as though still debating the cost. He spoke of the warp not as a weapon, but as a veil yet unlifted. And Horus knelt last. Loken looked up. This memory is not recorded in any Imperial archive. Silence, because it wasn't a memory they knew, but they felt it, a knowing in their bones, a flicker of something true, something older than the lie. The Grand Provost rose in rage. "This is sedition." The sigillite met his gaze. "This is history." Rubio stood aboard the Light of Judgment, a recovered relic vessel hidden in the deep warp of Saturn's black moon. It had not flown since the scouring, but it remembered. He placed his palm on the command pedestal. The ship answered in binary, ancient, loyal, and curious. "Who are you?" He did not lie. "I am what was left when the truth was murdered." "Do you seek war?" "No," he whispered. "I seek to wake them all." He closed his eyes, and the ship began to transmit, not data, not orders, but memories, spliced into new spheric beams, psychic resonance, and dream seeds, drifting into the void, quiet and deadly, a war of remembering. On Terra, Loken watched as the council dissolved into shouting, but the sigillite remained still. She looked up, then away, as though sensing something shift. "They will never forgive us," Loken said quietly. "They never did," she replied. He narrowed his eyes. Was this always the plan? Her gaze darkened. "I only planted the seed." He chose to grow it, Loken understood then. Rubio had not become a weapon. He had become a mirror, reflecting the heresy as it might have been, or perhaps always was. That night, the speaker for the Astronomicon threw himself from the heights of the palace. His final message, encoded in light patterns across the upper stratosphere, was a single phrase. "The throne is built on a forgotten grave." The administratum erased it within minutes, but it had already been seen, already remembered. On Macragh, an ultramarine remembrancer, once deaf to psychic resonance, painted a fresco unlike anything in Imperial history, depicting a boy with silver eyes watching his father walk into darkness, bearing the names of the Primarchs in chains across his back. She claimed it came to her in a dream. She did not know who the boy was, but in the capital square, thousands gathered beneath the fresco in silence, not mourning, not reverence, recognition. The sigillite stood alone in her private sanctum, a hidden chamber within the chamber, where a single soul light pulsed in stasis, small, flickering and ancient, not human, not machine, but old. She knelt beside it and whispered, "He's coming home." For a moment, the soul light flared, sorrowful, bright, then faded. In the outer systems, battle groups began to split, some refusing to fire on those who recited the old names, others demanding immediate execution. Brothers turned from each other, not in hatred, but in uncertainty, the kind that breaks legions. The memory plague was no longer a whisper, it was a storm, and at its heart stood Tylos Rubio. He bore no armor. He held no rank, but those who heard him speak remembered what had been lost. Some followed, some wept, some simply knelt, and across 1,000 worlds, statues of the Emperor began to crack, not by sabotage, but from within, as if the marble itself had remembered too. The silence cracks. There was a moment, in the deep of the night across 12 hive worlds, when the stars seemed to weep. No nova flared, no engines screamed, but millions woke in silence, breathless, their dreams carved into memory. Some dreamt of Istvan, not as war, but as sacrifice, of brothers killing brothers, not with hate, but regret. Some dreamt of the Emperor, not divine, but weary, a man too burdened to speak. And some, though they would never speak of it, dreamt of Horus kneeling before the golden throne, not in defiance, but in apology. The memory plague no longer whispered, it roared, and with it came something else, resonance. Tylos Rubio walked across the ruin of Balvex Prime, where only ash stone and bone towers remained. The world had died long before him, scoured clean during the Black Crusades. But its silence was sacred. It was here he stood, barefoot, his body wrapped in nothing but stained robes, and spoke into the void, not to command, but to release. Beside him 12 psychers, volunteers, martyrs, disciples, opened their minds, linked in a circle by a neural lattice. And then it began. The echo procession, a psychic web unlike any before. Memories drawn not from Rubio, but from the warp itself, filtered through will and pain, bound into coherence by the strength of belief. Across the Imperium, those sensitive to the warp flinched. They felt it, a wave of shared pasts, a burning golden palace not yet broken, a Primarch weeping in solitude, a mother holding her gene-forged son before a battle he would not survive. Pain and truth braided into raw memory. It was not just a broadcast, it was a confession. In the spire temples of Ophelia 7, the sisters of battle fell to their knees, weeping blood from beneath their helms. In the fired forges of Mars, cogitators screamed, bleeding machine spirits locked into infinite loops of corrupted remembrance. On the black ships, astropaths collapsed, hands clawing at their eyes. The Imperium's mind was breaking, and somewhere, deep beneath the crust of terror, Malcador's statue cracked open the first of its 1,000 sealed sigils. The sigillite stood before the inner High Council, her face drawn with exhaustion. Her voice barely rose above the quiet hum of static. It has begun. You mean he has begun, snapped the Lord Admiral. This heresy must be extinguished before it rips apart the segmentum. You cannot extinguish memory, she said coldly. Only delay it. Loken stood at her side, gaunt, silent. They call it Echo Heresy now, he muttered, even among the loyal chapters. They name what they fear, the sigillite replied. Then her eyes shifted toward the hollow projection, the warp map now riddled with flickering echoes. I warned them long ago, she said softly. Truth and time are sisters. You cannot bury one without the other clawing free. In the void above Valtor's reach, the Iron Revenant, flagship of the Inquisitional Legate, intercepted the echo procession signals. What the Lord Inquisitor expected was corruption. What he received was memory. He saw himself as a boy, taken from a forgotten hive slum. He saw the man who had trained him, a warrior who once bore the Lunar Wolf's crest before it was ground out of history. He saw himself kneel once, not to the Emperor, but to Garviel Loken, a man the record swore had died. He vomited in his armor, screamed in static, fired into empty walls, but still he remembered, and it shattered his faith. Rubio bled from the eyes now. Every time he dreamt, he spoke in forgotten tongues, coded dialects of Old Chthonian, Imperial Gothic, and something older still. He no longer ate. His disciples anointed him in dust. They believed he was becoming more than a man, a vessel of psychic inheritance, not by intent, but by consequence. He had become a crucible, a living psalm of unburied truth, and in his dreams something listened. Not the chaos gods, not the emperor, but a third silence, something without name or doctrine, a being formed of broken timelines, severed fates, aborted betrayals, what might have been. It whispered to him in the voice of Alpharius, and sometimes in the voice of Malcador. On Calth, a librarian of the 13th Legion collapsed in the middle of a public ceremony. His last words before his mind collapsed were, "The 9th still weeps. The 8th remembers, and the 2nd was never lost, only hidden." The Ultramarines silenced the plaza, but 200 civilians repeated those words the next day, word for word, and then 2,000. The echo was no longer just psychic, it had become viral. In the Vault of Keys, deep beneath the Noctis labyrinth, the sigillite opened the final seal. Inside waited a cryoprism. Within it, a face. Old, familiar, dead for 10,000 years, but still thinking, still remembering. She knelt. "You made me promise," she whispered, "but I failed." The face did not respond, but the stasis field pulsed, a flicker of ancient cognition, neither human nor machine. The first perpetual echo, preserved since the siege. She stood. "I will bring you back, if only to say goodbye." Then she keyed in the coordinates. The vault began to hum, and across the Imperium, reality began to bend. The echo procession reached the edge of Terra's noospheric field. The Administratum activated every black choir. The Inquisition launched counter-rituals from Phobos to Elysium. But the memories came through anyway, stronger, clearer, more intimate. Some cried, some raged, some remembered being there, not as soldiers, but as children of the Imperium, watching history shatter beneath the boot of silence. And across the Segmentum Solar, thousands of warp-lost ships found their way home, guided not by the Astronomicon, but by memory alone. Rubio stood at the edge of Balvex's cliff temples, his face hollow. Loken knelt beside him. "No armor, no weapon, just grief. They're going to kill you," Loken whispered. Rubio nodded. "I know." "Then why keep going?" Rubio didn't answer. He simply looked to the stars and said, "Because they already did. And I just didn't remember it yet." The wind carried his voice across the wasteland, a dying echo of a war never truly won. And in orbit, dozens of Imperial ships received the final signal. The throne we built was for the wrong god. The Covenant fractured the void around Terra shimmered with cold resonance, like the skin of a dead god breathing once more. The Astronomicon pulsed, not with its usual golden light, but with something subtler, something deeper, a second rhythm beneath the first, an echo beneath the flame. Ships across Segmentum Solar drifted, rerouted, or spun into orbitless madness as navigation engines failed to distinguish between real space and recollection. The memory storm that Tylos Rubio had unleashed was no longer just psychic. It had become ontological. The very laws of perception were weakening, and within the halls of the Silent Order, the sigillite stared into a pool of broken time. They called it the Mnemonic Well, a relic buried beneath the surface of Luna, known only to those who remembered the First Council, the real council, not the parodied institution the High Lords had become. Malcador had built it with his own will, not as a weapon, but as a prison. A vault of timelines, real, aborted, hypothetical, all stored like broken mirrors in stasis. A place to remember what must never be spoken. The well had been sealed after the siege. Even the Grey Knights forgot its location, but now it called to her. The sigillite walked its edge in silence. Shadows of old futures twisted on the surface. She saw a version of herself, much older, sitting beside Vulcan on a world of ash. She saw an Imperium where Horus lived, and the Emperor died, his corpse used as a beacon for chaos itself. She saw a galaxy without the heresy at all, one unified, golden, and hollow with lies. She saw a child with the eyes of Alfarius, who was not Alfarius. And then she saw Rubio, not as he was, but as he would be, burning everything. Her lips parted, but no sound came. There was no longer time to delay. Garviel Loken stood beneath the burning remains of the Echo Procession's last anchor point. The ritual had ended. Rubio's followers were scattered or dead. Their minds had frayed from too much shared memory. Rubio himself remained silent. He had not spoken in 6 days. He did not eat, sleep, or move. He simply burned, a slow psychic ember, his aura vibrating with ancient memories that no one dared name. It was no longer clear who he was, only what he had become. And still, Loken remained. "Why did I follow you?" he asked the quiet, not expecting an answer. But Rubio moved, just slightly. His lips twitched. Loken knelt, heart pounding like in the days of lunar wolves long past. Rubio whispered, "Because you remembered, when no one else did." Tears fell freely from Loken's eyes, and then the sky above cracked. The Imperium arrived. 3 battleships, 7 cruisers, 2 black ships, and 1 Arc Mechanicum, the Omni Relic, thought lost in the last Mars schism, now bearing a singularity cannon capable of erasing planetary memory itself. They came not to fight, but to erase. Rubio was not considered an enemy. He was deemed a paradox, a threat not to worlds, but to narrative continuity. He could not be killed. He had already died. More than once, if the timeline distortions were to be believed. So the Imperium would not kill him. They would unmake him. Loken activated the beacon Malcador had left for him. It pulsed 3 times. No ships withdrew. He clenched his fist, and somewhere, deep beneath Luna, the sigillite activated protocol, Mirrorfall. The sigillite's plan was never for Rubio to succeed. It was for him to become the proof that memory mattered. She had foreseen this path, knew the Imperium would tighten its grip, that truth would become cancerous in an empire built on erasure. But she had not foreseen what Rubio would remember. He did not recall just the heresy or the fall or the Legion's shame. He remembered before unity, before the Emperor, before Terra's rise. He remembered a name, a voice in the warp older than chaos, a first language spoken in dreamtime. Not a god, not a demon, a record, a being made of pure, unfiltered, historical truth. Vorash. It was not a name. It was a warning. And Rubio had become its vessel. As the Mechanicum readied the singularity cannon, a psychic pulse spread from the surface of Balvex. Rubio rose, slowly, eyes burning with pasts that never were. Loken stepped back. Rubio's mouth opened, not to scream, but to sing. It was not a voice. It was a language, the same language from the mnemonic well, the one even the Emperor had feared, and across the fleet, the minds of the Inquisitors, the Mechanicum, and the Psychers fractured. The Arc Mechanicum stalled, the black ship spun in orbit, and thousands of crewmen from countless walks of life fell to their knees, not in pain, but in recognition, because they remembered too, not all at once, but enough. A child remembered their mother before the Schola. A veteran remembered a friend executed during the culling of truth. A navigator remembered Terra's sky before the Astronomicon, when stars were visible. Rubio turned to Loken, and in a voice broken and beautiful, he said, "If memory survives, then truth never dies." Then he walked into the light of the Singularity cannon as it fired. No explosion followed, no heat, no dust, only silence. A silence that did not erase, but preserved. And then, across the Imperium, people began to wake up. The Sigillite stood alone in her sanctum, the mnemonic well now dark. She had sent him to die, but he had ascended instead, not as a saint, not as a god, but as a reminder, a scar across the mind of the Imperium. She whispered, "You were never meant to survive." But in her heart, she heard Rubio's final words, "That's why I did." And then, for the first time in 10,000 years, the Sigillite wept, not for the Emperor, not for terror, but for a galaxy that could no longer forget. The question that burned: there are wars born of blood, and others of silence. This one was neither. It was born of a question, a single impossible question, that had no place in the Imperium of man. What if we were wrong? It spread not like flame but like memory, slipping into the cracks of thought, echoed in dreams, whispered in data tombs once thought sealed. It moved faster than ships and deeper than words. Those who heard it often denied it. Others wept. Some died from knowing, but a few, a precious few, remembered. And in that remembering, the Imperium began to fracture. Malcador stood in the Black Vault, far beneath the ice mines of Enceladus, where the oldest records of terror were kept locked behind walls of myth and reinforced denial. She no longer wore her grey robes. She stood now in black, the first time she had donned that colour since the final days of the heresy. The Council of the Seven Shadows had convened, answering her summons not with loyalty, but suspicion. Each of them was a killer of ideas. They made empires bleed with bureaucracy. They dissolved entire cultures with footnotes. The memory of Rubio's ascension had reached them all. A whisper, a dream, a feeling, and it terrified them. One by one, they demanded an explanation. Malcador gave them none. Instead, she opened the vault, and what emerged was not a weapon, but a question, a data sigil from the dark age of technology. A single sentence, written in ancient Low Gothic. Who decided what the truth was? Silence fell like the blade of a guillotine. Arch-Lexigent Sarpellion, keeper of the Imperial Creed's rewritten scriptures, stepped forward. This cannot exist. Malcador did not blink. And yet it does. Truth is not democratic, said Sarpellion. It never was, Malcador replied. But it was remembered. Until we made it forgettable. Meanwhile, across the stars, the echoes of Rubio's final words grew louder. On Sapra Mundi, several officers of the Naval High Command laid down their ranks, reciting memories of comrades who had been erased from official records. On Baka, a rogue Mechanicus sect, the Anamnes, rose in secret, transmitting fragments of unredacted history across Vox frequencies buried in background radiation. On Terra itself, statues of the Emperor began weeping. not with blood or oil, but with names, names of the forgotten, those who had died in loyalty to truths now buried. And in the underhives of Vanaheim, a preacher without eyes whispered sermons of a golden galaxy that never was, speaking the name Rubio with reverence and dread. The question had taken root, the war had begun, and no one had drawn a blade. In the ruins of the Echo Procession's last temple, Garviel Loken stood before a circle of warriors. Not Astartes, not anymore. They were remembrancers, soldiers turned scribes, administrators turned truth-seekers, Astartes who had severed their gene loyalty and replaced it with memory. He called them the Ordo Mnemos. He did not command them, he inspired them. And though he did not carry a banner, they followed him as if he were the last truth the Imperium could still believe in. "We are not rebels," he said. "We are the voice of the dead." And they are not done speaking. Their mission was simple: find the last living witnesses of the heresy, protect them, preserve them, and tell their stories before they were erased. The Imperium responded quickly. Death mandates were issued. Inquisitorial agents declared a new heresy: epistemological treason, the crime of possessing unverified memory. Entire archive fleets were ordered to purge themselves. The Mnemos went underground, but their stories did not. Malkador faced her second betrayal, not by enemies, but by friends. 2 of the 7 shadows broke their oaths. They aligned with a hidden sect of the Inquisition, known as the Oculatus Nullius, those who had sworn an oath to never know, to protect the Imperium not through knowledge, but through unknowing. They declared Malkador compromised, a hidden loyalist to Rubio's heresy. They moved to have her erased, not assassinated, for that would be too crude. Instead, they began rewriting history itself. They seeded false narratives in subsector archives, altered Pict records, reprogrammed servitors, even implanted false memories in key agents. And within a single cycle, Malkador's existence was in question. She was now a ghost in her own empire. The irony did not escape her, nor did the inevitability. In a final desperate maneuver, she summoned the only being who had once refused to forget, the Primarch of the 8th Legion, Conrad Kurz, or rather, what was left of him. Kept in stasis, fragments of his psyche encoded in nightmare matrices, the Sigillite accessed what remained of the Night Haunter's mind. Not for strategy, not for prophecy, but for a warning. "They will turn even memory into murder," he whispered, his broken voice still carrying the scent of blood and poetry. "Truth is more terrifying than lies because it does not comfort. It confronts if you awaken what lies beneath the forgetting. You must be willing to burn with it." Malkador's voice shook as she asked, "Is that how we fall?" The echo of Kurz's laughter replied, "No, that's how we begin again." In the final days of the chapter, aboard the drifting ship Lucid Nim, a child discovered a sealed audio recording embedded in the walls. It played only once. A voice, quiet, scorched by time. Rubio's. They called it heresy, to remember the truth. But if that truth is a weapon, then we were already at war. Not to destroy the Imperium, but to remind it why it exists. The war isn't between loyalty and rebellion. It's between those who remember and those who erase. Choose wisely. And across the galaxy, those words became a psalm, not of faith, but of defiance, terror. The Golden Throne groaned as it had for 10,000 years. The Emperor, corpse, god, beacon, myth, remained motionless atop it, entombed in a sarcophagus of failing technology and unrelenting reverence. Around him, the Adeptus Custodes stood, gold-clad and grave-eyed, unmoving as time itself unravelled in the depths of the palace. Malcador entered alone. No fanfare, no honour guard, no name. Even the throne's attending tech priest did not see her, her presence wiped from protocols, expunged from the Newspheric registries. She was a null state within Imperial thought, a living paradox who had once built the Imperium and now existed beyond its permissions. She bowed her head, not in worship, but apology. "I brought them this far," she whispered, voice hoarse with exhaustion. "I made them forget. I erased the sins, the brothers, the truths that would have broken them. I shaped the lie you sit upon." She looked up, eyes burned with sleeplessness. "But I cannot bear its weight anymore." There was no answer from the throne. There never was, but the Astronomicon flickered, only once, and for a moment, all across the galaxy, the warp shuddered. Loken's Mnemos warbands had fractured into cells, operating in the shadows of hive cities, archives, even ecclesiarchal chapels. The truths they carried had become volatile, more weapon than word. They had preserved the memories of Istvan, the fall of Magnus, the siege. They had found survivors, hidden texts, forbidden audio recordings of Primarchs speaking of doubt, of failure, of regret. Each truth was another stone flung into the stagnant waters of belief, and each stone was answered with fire. Entire hives burned. Planets declared secundum oblivium, a new classification of annihilation reserved not for Xenos worlds, but for Imperial planets that refused to forget. The Inquisition fractured. Some, like Inquisitor Halvax of the Ordo Hereticus, waged crusades against the Mnemos, burning them as epistemic blasphemers. Others, quietly, dangerously, joined them. Librarians of forgotten chapters defected. Rogue Adeptus Mechanicus data priests began spreading corrupted cogitator codes, mem fractures that rewrote local history files with unredacted data. The truth was no longer a whisper. It was a roar, and it was coming for the heart of the Imperium. The breaking point came on Narcissus Secundus, a shrine world known for its endless tomb parades, where saints were buried atop saints, their relics woven into the fabric of its cities. The Mnemos reached it first. They found an ancient crypt, deep beneath the Basilica Umbra, bearing the unmarked remains of an Astartes with broken armour and shattered eyes. His name, hidden for 10,000 years, Rubio Carostrum. His body had been unmade by decree, even in death. But someone, perhaps Malcador, perhaps a rogue remembrancer, had buried him here, unmarked but untouched. Loken stood beside the sarcophagus. He reached out, placed a single memory crystal upon Rubio's chestplate. It pulsed once, then dissolved into light. "You remembered for us," Loken said quietly. "Now we remember you." The crowd behind him, warriors, civilians, adepts, and children, bowed their heads. And in orbit, the response came. An exterminatus decree, by the hand of Lord Inquisitor Zethakar, bearer of the Sigil of the Silent. Narcissus Secundus was to be cleansed, not for rebellion, not for heresy, but for memory. Malcador returned to the Council of the Seven Shadows for the last time. 4 seats were empty. 2 were filled by figures cloaked in red silence, agents of the Oculatus Nullius, and one, hers, was now stripped of its sigils, the gold lacquer burned away. She stood before them with the broken hilt of a blade. Constancy, her old staff, shattered during the heresy and reforged twice since. "You created this empire with words," she said to them. "Then you locked those words behind lies. You called it peace. But all you did was defer the collapse. Arch-Lexigent Sarpellion replied, without blinking. And what would you replace it with? Chaos. Doubt. Dissent. No, Malkador said. She held up a small data shard. It flickered. Images bloomed across the dark chamber. Not propaganda, not sacred iconography, but faces. The faces of those lost to history. Rubio, Arkad, Janira, the Remembrancers, unnamed warriors, silent heroes. Human beings whose lives had been redacted, rewritten, or forgotten entirely. A sea of eyes, a tide of ghosts. I would replace it with memory, Malkador said, because only in memory can we be truly judged. And only in judgment can we change. They condemned her. They issued her unmaking. Not execution, no. Malkador would not be martyred. She would be deleted. But as they moved to cast her out of the networked registers of terror, her final safeguard activated. The truth unraveled. In the hours that followed, entire systems of the Segmentum Solar began broadcasting simultaneous visual records of the Horus Heresy, uncensored, unfiltered. Private moments, betrayals, conversations between Primarchs, the doubts of Sanguinius, the fury of Vulcan, the hesitation of Horus, the illusion of divine certainty shattered. Across the Imperium, entire sectors fell into reflective rebellion. Not raising weapons, but refusing edicts, tearing down falsified statues, redeclaring old names once scrubbed from existence. Ships refused orders. Planets shut down transmissions from the ecclesiarchy. And in the void between stars, the Mnemos gathered, a fleet not built for war, but for remembrance. They did not carry banners. They carried stories. The final image of the chapter is Malkador herself, her figure clad not in shadow, but in white, standing upon a shattered balcony high above Terra's ruins, overlooking the storm clouds rising from below. The vox crackles, Loken's voice. You were right. They fear what they forgot more than what they remember. She closes her eyes. The wind howls. The stars flicker, uncertain. Then let us remind them. Ashes of the Ever-War. It began with silence. Not the silence of peace, but the deep, terrible quiet that falls before a world decides what it will become. Whether to submit or to remember. The Astronomicon pulsed irregularly now. A flickering signal in the warp. Once the beacon of the Emperor's will, now jittered like a candle caught in breathless air. Across Segmentum Solar, navigators whispered of erratic constellations and phantom stars. The warp shifted. And in the shadows of holy terror, a rebellion born not of fire or faith, but memory, prepared to die for its truth. The Mnemos fleet arrived in system at 0433.02 M.42. It was not an armada, not a show of force. It was a slow, ghostly procession of vessels, ancient and barely armed, drifting like mourners through space. They broadcast one message on all channels. We remember. Lord Commander Verhimmel, master of Segmentum Solar and heir to the Bastion Protocol of the Throne World, stood in the command spire of the Aegis Immortal, the last of the Saturnine Dreadhalls still operational. Behind him, generals of the Astra Militarum, Archmagos Logi, and a detachment of custodies formed a wall of grim silence before him, the Mnemos's final emissary. He was no warrior. He was a broken man in scarred black power armor, marked not by purity seals or litanies, but fragments of burned text, remembrancer poetry etched in gold. Loken. His voice was a whisper compared to the power on the bridge, but it cut sharper than any blade. You built an Imperium on a tomb. You sealed the future behind walls of lies. But we remember the truth. and we will not forget Vehemor drew his bolt pistol. Truth is not peace. Truth is the weapon of traitors Loken did not flinch. Truth is the only war worth dying for. At the edge of Terra's orbit, battle did not begin. It erupted. But this was not a war of conquest. It was apocalypse. Not in the form of destruction, but revelation. As the first salvos of loyalist fire lanced into the Mnemo's fleet, encrypted data bombs detonated throughout Imperial noosphere networks. They weren't weapons, but records, leaking thousands of hours of unredacted archives across the Imperium. The final words of Horus, the broken oaths of Russ, the ghosted logs of Malkador's covert purges. They were not theories anymore. They were truth, and truth kills more surely than any warhead. On Gethsemane 9, an ecclesiarch hanged himself, his own sermons proven false. On Marium, a scholar world refused its own graduation rites, tearing down tapestries woven with false history. On Venenium Prime, a Grey Knight's librarian dropped his warding staff and joined the Mnemo's fleet with his eyes full of tears. Meanwhile, beneath Terra, in chambers never built for mortal knowledge, Malkador walked through the labyrinth of the dead. She had carved it herself 10,000 years ago. A mnemonic structure encoded into reality with the help of psychometric stasis engines and forgotten warp-scarring rituals. The labyrinth contained the unshaped truth of the heresy, raw, painful, and unfiltered by dogma. Even she had not entered it in millennia. Now, at the end of all things, she returned. The labyrinth had changed, grown, twisted. The truths within it had mutated. Visions flickered in every corridor, moments replayed like psychic echoes. Rogel Dawn weeping beside Sanguinius's broken body. Magnus begging for the Emperor to listen. Malkador herself kneeling before the throne, whispering, "Let me be forgotten." And then deeper, a chamber lit by starlight and weeping ash, and at its center, not data, not memory, but him, Horus, not alive, not ghost, a memory so real it could bleed. He stood in silence, pale and terrible, staring at her with the same eyes that once turned away on the surface of Ulanor. "You made them forget me," he said softly. Malkador nodded. "I did. And now you remember." She took a long breath. "Now they remember." He did not move. But for a heartbeat, Terra trembled. "Then they will burn you." "Perhaps," she replied, "but not before they see." In orbit, the Mnemo's fleet was dying. One by one, ships bloomed into fire, cleansed by orbital defenses, silenced by the fury of blind devotion. But even as they fell, they transmitted more. Truths woven into code, prayers transcribed into confession, coordinates to memory wells hidden on dead moons and shattered stations. In death, the Mnemos became immortal. Their deaths woke the galaxy. Loken's flagship, the Vigilant Echo, was the last to fall. As it broke apart over Terra, he recorded his final transmission. No oath, no farewell, just 4 words. "We are not liars." Then the silence took him. Malkador stood at the heart of the labyrinth, surrounded by echoes. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 10,000 years she prayed, not to the Emperor, not to fate, but to memory itself, to those who had been silenced, to the forgotten, to the nameless. "Let us be remembered," she whispered. And the warp shook. A scream, silent and world-breaking, ripped across the noosphere. It was not from Chaos, nor the machine god, nor the Emperor. It was the sound of an empire remembering itself, and like a flood breaking a dam, the age of lies ended. The last scene of the chapter is wordless. Terror burns, but not in fire, in light. Archives once sealed open on their own. Statues crack, banners fall. And somewhere in the ruins of a forgotten chapel, a blind child finds a broken memory, crystal glowing in the ashes. She lifts it to her ear and hears the voice of Rubio Carostrum say, gently, "Do you remember us?" She smiles, and the stars blink, as if in answer. The empire that forgot itself. It was the end of all things, and yet the galaxy turned, but not as it once had. Terror, heart of the Imperium, no longer whispered lies. Its great cathedrals, once alive with the roar of sermons and blind oaths, stood in hollow quiet, haunted by echoes too old for even the warp to recognize. The Astronomicon flickered no longer. It had gone dark. A final mercy or a final judgment, none could say. Ships lost in the void drifted, unmoored from the Emperor's light. Warp storms churned along the eastern fringe. Ancient warp beasts stirred in the galactic south, and the stars themselves dimmed as if in mourning. But what truly died was certainty, and from its grave, truth rose. Malkador stood before the golden throne, not the woman the Imperium had known, not the ghost who whispered from behind the veil of centuries. She was unmasked now, gaunt, radiant, weary beyond mortal comprehension. Time had no meaning here, not in this room, not now. She stood alone. The custodes had long since withdrawn. The tech priests had stopped their maintenance rituals. Even the Sisters of Earth, silence, mute watchers of her darkest acts were gone. Only he remained, the Emperor, or what remained of him. He had not spoken in 10,000 years. But as she approached, something changed. Not speech, not thought, but a presence, a reaching. She had brought him everything. The rebellion of Mnemos, the awakening of ancient truths, the memory of Horus, unshrouded by dogma. She had brought him the past. Why now? It wasn't his voice, but hers, her thoughts trembling. Because I am dying, she whispered, and because they must choose. And the throne, impossibly vast, whispered back, not in words, but in memory. Elsewhere, in shattered cathedrals and buried vaults, truth unfolded. On Kydia Reborn, a guardsman knelt beside a monument to Saint Celestine. He held in his hands the unedited log of her first resurrection. Not a miracle, but a psychic burst triggered by near-death agony and lost sororitas technology. He did not curse her. He wept. On Baal, a sanguinary priest opened a gene tomb sealed since the heresy. Within, the full record of Sanguinius's last thoughts, his doubts, his desire not to fight his brother, but to save him. And on Luna, deep in the Archivum Umbra, a librarian of the Grey Knights uncovered the Prime Codex of Malkador. The first version, before the edits, before the fear, its final page read, "Do not make me a saint, do not make him a god. Remember what we were, or all we built will be dust and silence." The Imperium was crumbling, but not from war, not from demons or rebellion, from awakening. Planets revolted not to secede, but to relearn. Cults formed around not false prophets, but historians. Soldiers laid down arms not out of cowardice, but because they no longer knew who their enemy was. Memory, once the greatest threat to order, now threatened to consume the very shape of the galaxy. And so, in her final moments, Malkador chose. She walked to the edge of the throne's radiant field, where thought and matter blurred, where time ceased. She reached out, and she let go, of lies, of power, of fear. They say the Emperor opened his eyes, only once, just for a heartbeat, long enough to see her, to remember her name before it was wiped from every record, and then he closed them, forever. Across the galaxy, something changed. Not instantly, not visibly, but like a distant wind shifting course. The warp stilled, the storms calmed, the screams dulled, and in the space left behind, something new was born. Not an empire, not a god, but remembrance. On a small world, far from any strategic route or sacred site, a child walked into an old ruin. The stars above her blinked in strange patterns, no longer bound to the Astronomicon. She found a shattered column, and beneath it, a name. Not of a Primarch, not of a saint, but of a man who once wrote poetry about spaceflight. Rubio Carostrum. She traced the letters with her hand, and behind her others gathered. Not soldiers, not warriors, just those who wanted to remember. So ends the Imperium as it was, not with a bang, not with fire, but with memory, with the slow, gentle collapse of a lie so vast it became a galaxy, and in its place, not a paradise, not peace, but a chance to begin again, and perhaps to choose better.